Good evening, everyone. I'm David Johnson, Transform Ed Consulting, and I would like to thank my friend and colleague, Cassandra Williams of Educational Innovation 360 Degrees. She is the brains behind our operation here. So if you're happy with seeing us on YouTube, thank Cassandra. And our guest tonight is Dr. Allison Jane Ross. Allison, where are you today?
Hello, I am coming to you live from Austin, Texas.
Live from Austin, Texas.
Right,
Now, how'd
right.
you wind up
The
in
la-
Austin, Texas? I think you were Louisianan.
oh, I am very much Louisianian. I've lived in Texas since 2006. I still consider myself a Louisiana ambassador to Texas.
An
So,
ambassador to
uh,
Texas.
I do, because I have made it a goal of mine to really show Cajun culture. There's a lot of culture here in Texas, so let me show some of that great culture that's happening there across the river, in good old Louisiana. So and the fusion of food, David. That's the main thing for me is the food. Our two cultures, man,
Uh,
they could make some beautiful food. So,
well, I should
but I
properly introduce you then, and then we
yeah.
can talk about food. Allison
That's
Jane
perfect.
Ross, EDD, educational coach and learning architect consultant, C. Jane Thrive, LLC, Austin, Texas, has been an educator for over 19 years. Her career has included teaching middle school history in a project based learning environment, shaping and implementing an early childhood to middle school coding and robotics program as director of innovation, and serving as an instructional leader in district and campus level roles. Dr. Ross also serves now as an implementation specialist for Eduphoria Incorporated. She holds a bachelor's degree in history from LSU, a master's degree in educational administration from Texas A&M with K-12 principal certification, and a doctorate in education from Marymount University. On the soft side, she is dog mom to Bodine Bacchus and Stilly Josephine, and a cat mom to Magnolia and Booney, who all join her to cheer LSU during football season. Allison, I've got questions. I've got questions.
I've got some answers.
All
Let's
right. So
go.
tell
Let's
us
do
about
it.
project based learning. That's one of the things that I endorse. But how did it work for you?
Oh gosh. It was one of those things that I found to be one of the most effective ways to reach my students as a history teacher. I taught in a Title I environment. A lot of my students were coming in from other countries. So we had lots of ESL needs, we had lots of IEPs going on in the classroom, and history is bulky, and I found there's a lot of students that have some anxiety around it. Also, I teach middle school. So my middle schoolers, I wanted them to be excited about history. I wanted them to get really excited and be a lifelong learner with history. And I know these like sound very lofty, but I really wanted them to have the agency over what they were learning. And project-based learning provided that framework that
Mm-hmm.
really anchored the students in the content. And so I
Mm-hmm.
found it to be a great differentiator, while also giving that agency. And my classroom thrived because of it. So
Well, great.
one
Well,
year
you
of
mentioned middle
implementation.
school.
Yeah.
So I
Yes.
note that you were an early childhood to middle school coding and robotics program lead. What does that mean? What kind of setting was that where you would have early childhood through middle school? Was it all one building, or did you did you travel from one building to another?
That's a great question. So that began when I was the director of innovation at a private and independent K through 8 school. And they were actually pre-K. So one of the things I did as a director of innovation, working with the amazing teachers that I was coaching, we set out to go, how can we make something applicable to coincide with our math curriculum? So really excite and elevate our math curriculum starting at pre-K. And I started like observing pre-K and watching how that curriculum was delivered. And then I would go back and take coding concepts and I would break them down, and like, what is the smallest building block here? How can we reinforce that? And so with the help of the teachers, we created this really great program where I built the curriculum that's coincide along their math curriculum. And so we had 3-year-olds learning very basic coding concepts all the way to 8th grade that really built upon each other. And were not using screens for the early childhood part. So that's a big misconception. So it was a really
So
robust
you
program.
developed the curriculum.
Yes.
The way we use the word curriculum sometimes is contradictory, but you developed the curriculum, I'll say standards for those grades K through 8th or through middle school. You developed the curriculum, the standards, the things that students should know and or be able to do.
Absolutely, as well as teaching myself how to code at age 34. So
Very
that was
impressive.
another like piece I had to add on to it. Was I was in my mid 30s and I was like, this is something really important. Students should be able to exercise math in this way. You probably should learn how to code first, Allison. So I set out to do that.
And in our conversation before we went live, you mentioned that you have a background in technology.
I do.
How did you gain that background?
That's a really great question, David. First of all, my dad was a big computer enthusiast. I grew up on a Tandy playing Oregon Trail. And so we were one of the first, my sister and I were one of the first kids in our little town of Pineville, Louisiana, to play with AOL. And I know that sounds so scary, but knowing what AOL, the social media back before it was cool in the 90s. So I've just always been a tinkerer and a maker. And so when I became an educator, that curiosity of mine just kind of was sparked on how can I reach my students with technology tools. And when I started teaching in 2005, that genesis was happening of all these new instructional technology tools. And so I just kind of caught the wave and made it a goal of mine to continually seek out what would engage my students, and also make my job way more efficient and effective as a teacher with technology.
Well, you have a very impressive background and you've done a lot in your 19 years of serving education. But our topic for today is small investments, big impact to build belonging. And apparently you have a strong background in that as well. So we have 4 bullets. Allison, where would you like to start?
I say let's talk about my 3 favorite words: culturally responsive teaching. It's kind of been something that I, through my own experiences as a teacher, as a human, I have found to be something that is so powerful in building belonging within our schools and our organizations. It's the idea of being culturally responsive, not just in education, but in leadership and how we work with others is so important, especially now, whenever empathy is something that we all should be practicing daily in high volumes. So, do you have any experience with culturally responsive teaching, David? Have you dabbled in CRT?
See, I don't know, but I can tell you, we learn by stepping in things sometimes. And I stepped in a big faux pas some years ago. I was living in South Dakota, and I started my career as a music teacher. I attended State University College at Potsdam Crane School of Music. Great school, great school. And I'm in South Dakota, and it just so happens I meet one of my classmates who is teaching music to Native students. And she invited me one day to come in and teach a class, and I stepped right in it. I made mistakes. I made faux pas, social faux pas, not understanding the cultural background of the students. And in many respects, thinking back, I insulted those students the way I operated. So yes, that's my experience with culturally responsive teaching, and it was not a good experience on the behalf of the students because I didn't know what I was doing.
Well, first off, thank you for that vulnerability. And I think the whole reason that I'm so passionate about culturally responsive teaching is because I have witnessed and been a part of the errors that happen whenever we are not really using that culturally responsive lens. So brief history lesson. I think I would be remiss if I didn't have a history lesson here. But culturally responsive teaching came forth early 1900s, late 1800s, where the conversation began, where we started noticing that our classes were becoming a little bit more diverse. And educational leaders in that time started asking questions saying, we've got these students in our classroom, and yet we're teaching to we're teaching only one culture, right? So if you look at our standards, if you look at our objectives and things that are studied now in curriculum, what cultures are really truly being represented? And along that same line, what are the other cultures that may be represented? Are they being fully represented, or are they just a supplemental part of a storyline? And whose storyline owns that? So
Well,
that is
I
kind
got
of
to
the
tell you,
genesis.
Allison, I and a colleague are in the process of getting a paper we've written published, and it's on white supremacy and the 21st century effects of white supremacy. Could you tie that together with CRT?
I actually can do that very, very easily, David. This all began because I read a book by Layla Saad called Me and White Supremacy. And it really, I read it during the pandemic. So while everyone was mastering their TikTok dances and sourdough starters during lockdown, I engaged in a book study with two other colleagues of mine that I used to teach with. And we just delved into this book. And I actually heard about the book at South by Southwest EDU the prior year. And so I was like, let me just go into this book and see what I can learn. And in doing that, I faced my own role in white supremacy and how as an educator, I can use the tools that I have to combat white supremacy in education. Um, White supremacy has no place in education. It does not serve anyone. And so, as I think about what I could do when I face my own privilege, I would go, okay, now that I know, what can I do? And so that was whenever I said, okay, you're an educator. How can you influence education to where it's more equitable for students, where students feel like they belong?
Now, could you say something about the effects or the outcome of using CRT? Uh, uh, I'm sure you have the research to support CRT. So if you could speak about the outcomes from various studies and the overall effect of CRT.
Absolutely. So I can talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about historically what's happened. So
Mhm.
CRT has proven in research to build. It builds engagement and it builds student achievement, which for school leaders, those are two very big elements that you would like to have going strong within your learning organization. Are those ideas of my students are engaged, my students feel like they belong here, and they're achieving and they're experiencing success with the content and the curriculum that we are providing. So those two pillars right there of achievement and engagement is what really is a very important point to bring up around CRT. The next is relationships. One thing that when I was a teacher, I would a lot of times people would ask me like, my students or this troubling student really loves your class, what are you doing? I said it's all about the relationship. And I think about that when I was in leadership as well. It's the relationships we build with our teachers, and so it really strengthens relationships. But in addition to that, when you have those strong relationships, people enter your building with this sense of well-being. They're cared for, and so that kind of, it all is cyclical, right? So it all builds together. One thing that I really appreciate about critical thinking is that it provides multiple perspectives. And David, as you and I know, we both conducted research studies before. So you know that whenever your data comes from a diverse backgrounds, that your study is even stronger. So think about that idea as we think about our students. When
Hmm.
our students are immersed into a classroom where there's multiple perspectives being provided, that only edifies and promotes and makes a stronger connection to learning.
Well,
So
Allison, the title of our topic today is Small Investments, Big Impact to Build Belonging. Small investments. What would be an example of a small investment?
So that's a great, and that's what I want to take home because I talk about culturally responsive teaching, and folks are like,
Right.
"What?" And so there's so much research, and if you ever want me to tell you about all the research, I'd be happy to. But let's talk about yes, what can I do tomorrow? So as a teacher, it's about agency. It's about building belonging. If you're walking in, when I'm coaching teachers and I sit and I observe them a few times and I walk in and say, are you tired? Are you exhausted? Like, because if a teacher is going into the classroom and all the agency is on them, so to provide the lesson, to direct the content, to have the discussions, if they're walking out of it exhausted from just delivering and talking the whole time, we should have a talk about agency. When we feel like we can talk to each other and establish who we are and establish where we're from and talk about our experience in juxtaposition to content, so make it scholastic, we're able to really have a belonging or have that feeling of we're belonging in that space.
Are you
When I'm
speaking
able to tell you
among,
about me,
are you saying among teachers, among educators, or between educators and students?
honestly, this goes for both. When people have agency, when students have agency in the classroom, you see student success.
So what
When
would be that
teachers have
small investment then?
your small investment, so coming from a history lens, it would be
Hmm.
having discussions about, what does this topic mean for you?
Okay.
So I've witnessed, for example, in a social studies classroom, a history social studies classroom, taking the idea of women's suffrage and saying, okay, so what elements of women's suffrage have you witnessed growing up, or
So
have
is
you
the
seen
investment
in your
on
life?
the teacher making an investment or the student making an investment?
It is so, and from this lens that we're discussing, it's going to be the teacher making that
Okay.
small investment into giving their students that agency. Um, and I know we live in a time where time is very precious and we don't have extra time to add all these extra elements. And I guess that's one of the big takeaways is that this is something that small investments over time will lead to that big impact. When you're
And the big
asking, when
impact
you're
is that the student feels he or she or they belong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Belonging, but then that carries over into achievement, that carries over into engagement. And so it's these positive things that derive from that synergy of belonging.
Well, our one of the bullets is why does it matter? I think we might have covered that very well because I had a lot of questions about
Absolutely.
about why it matters, and well, you tied white supremacy together with all of that. Oh, that's very good, very good. Well, we have, I guess, two other bullets here: CRT study snapshot and the quote
Yes.
from Maya Angelou: "When you know better, you do better." Where would you like to go now?
Well, I do want to talk about my research study. I think it's something that I'm very passionate about. This idea of taking the tenets of critical pedagogy, where culturally responsive teaching derives from, and I conducted a research study in Texas where I coached secondary social studies teachers in culturally responsive teaching using the anchoring text of Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain by one of my heroes, Soretta Hammond. And so through that text, I was able to coach our teachers in a really nice organic way of what's happening in your classroom and how does this apply. And we had a nice discussion. Our coaching sessions were just so fruitful, and there were 7 themes that came out of that study. So these were just the themes that I witnessed personally as a researcher. So an increasing in engagement, which we talked about. Um, I found that with culture responsive teaching, there was a large amplification of the materials being used, the educational materials, because there were more lenses to provide, there were more perspectives to examine whenever we're using them. Awareness, so awareness of the students with multiple perspectives, but also an awareness on part of the teachers of knowing more about their students, because their students are sharing more, so they're learning more about their students and really strengthening and fortifying those relationships. We talked about being vulnerable and how it created a sense of vulnerability and kinship amongst the faculty members because they were able to exercise these strategies together, like increased dialogue and ability for students to be able to have agency and share, and have selection over how they apply their knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
There was a strong theme, and this will not shock you, that this is such an important topic that needs time allocation for it. So time allocation to do research and understand, while also experimenting and trying out the different strategies.
Now let me interrupt you.
Yes.
Time allocation, whose time and when? For example, CRT study snapshot. Was that your dissertation, or is this other research that you've conducted after completing your doctorate?
This is my research that I conducted during my doctorate. So this would be my research, my qualitative research study I did for my dissertation.
Okay. So when you say time allocation, do you mean the time that it takes to give students agency, as you were speaking earlier? You know, you mentioned earlier that there's such a time crunch in the classroom, or in a whole day of a teaching day. So is that what you mean by the time allocation?
So for this study, the time allocation would actually be on the part of the leadership giving teachers a time allocation for culturally responsive examination. And so that was one theme when we started talking about why is this effective? It's because they were allocated the time in
culturally
order to
responsive
do the study.
Examinations, assessments.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, by first of all, just doing their own self-reflection through the text. So reading the text, having time to discuss the text and digest, doing their own assessment, their own eco-scan of their current practices, and seeing where these elements of culturally responsive teaching can be inserted. We talked some about the strategies and where those would apply in our high school history classroom. So just that time allocation to focus on this concept with your students. And I think that sometimes whenever we do have professional development, we kind of try to take one concept and goes to everybody, but really just focusing in and coaching this one grade level really had a high yield. And so that was one of the
Allison,
benefits of the
study.
I
got a mess of questions here. All right, I want to ask you about coaching. All right, so we're talking about teaching, and you mentioned the word earlier, but I want to make sure that we're clear. We're talking about pedagogy. You're talking about teaching differently depending upon the cultural background of your students, right? For example, the example I gave with teaching Native students. I was out of my element. I did it all wrong, and I would do it better now because I know that I should be culturally responsive to their needs. So when you're speaking about professional development for teachers, are you teaching them, and when you talk about coaching, are you teaching them the pedagogy to be successful for the cultural backgrounds of students?
So I am teaching them. There's no we. I am teaching them the strategies to implement. Okay. One thing about, and you brought up a really great point of contention when I first started this study, was talking to the teachers. They are like, I have so many different cultures in my classroom. How am I supposed to learn all of them? You know, and that's, and first of all, that's a teacher's heart. First of all, shining straight through, saying, I'm trying to reach every single one of my kids in my classroom, and I want to know all about them. But that is a lofty goal. And with state standards and state testing, that's not always something we can just stop everything and really know every culture in our classroom. We would love to do that. However, you can build in elements, these small investments that give students the chance to express themselves, to talk about concepts such as women's suffrage, such as cultural diffusion, through their own perspectives. How are we asking students to not just regurgitate the information, but just talk about it from their perspective and their lens? And so even if you have a classroom with only one culture represented, you're going to have students that have diverse experience. That's the beauty of human experience, right? Is we all have different walks. And so giving them the agency in order to express that or self-select the project that they'd like to do, those are those little small pieces that I can add in with teachers. So yes, you've got your content teachers. Let's look at one way that we can add in that little strategy that will help bloom and give the students a time to be able to speak about their background.
I hear your project-based teaching coming in here.
Through.
Tie that together with culturally responsive teaching.
to tying it together with cultural responsibility teaching, that is giving students the agency to have democratic dialogue in class,
Right.
question authority, question power structures. That's all pieces of culturally responsive teaching. And I know those words sound so scary, right? But part of us being able to build agency within our students is giving them the ability to question. Why are
But
we
now tie that
studying?
together with your project-based learning.
Well, with project-based learning, you have your gut, we all start with our what do we know, what do we want to know, what do we need to know more about?
Mhm.
And so this helps them evaluate all the multiple perspectives of what they don't know in project-based learning to really edify that final project to bring in multiple perspectives in order to have a product that is been put together by different experiences coming together as one. Now, we know the golden rule of PBL, it is all about the process. Process is golden. And so having culturally responsive elements built into that PBL process is super imperative.
Wow. Oh, we have just a few minutes left. Do you want to speak about the quote from Maya Angelou?
Yeah, so that's kind of my own call to action. Dr. Angelou is a great inspiration to me. I have "Still I Rise" tattooed on my arm, as well as a song tattooed on my arm, because I didn't talk about this, but I was a music major at first at LSU.
You too.
So what? Well, you heard it here first. David and I are going to drop an album, so just get ready for it. Uh, Dr. Maya Angelou says, do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, you do better. And so that was kind of my own call to action for myself after reading Me and White Supremacy was, you know better now, Allison. So how are you going to do better? And so I committed to researching. I committed my doctoral research to really building belonging through working with teachers and students and school leaders. So my now, if you're listening to this, you now know better, right? And so you now have the tools. So my challenge is for every person that's hearing this to go and try one strategy. Go ask someone something about their day, some way, just have, or maybe give people a chance to share about who they are surrounding one topic. Now, I know we live in a very spicy climate right now with current events, but there are just small investments that you can make by just asking folks, their opinions, or what does this mean to you, or what's been your experience with
Mhm.
this?
Well,
Just really
Allison,
building that dialogue.
if you could wrap all this up into a single package, what would be the takeaway you'd like people to have?
you know, Give agency when possible. If you're listening to this as a school leader, how have you given your teachers agency over their own performance and their goal setting? How do they have agency within a classroom? If you're a teacher listening to this, how have you given your student agency today? So my call to action is, how can you invest in the wealth of experiences that are sitting
Mhm.
in your organizations? Also be personable, invest in people, avoid comments that are blanket, or like, how, I don't know about you, David, but sometimes we're like, you're doing great. That's such a blanket comment. Sometimes it's more of, hey, I really like how you presented that project, so those kinds of pieces. So be personable, ask genuine questions, and truly invest in your people. That is the
Well,
biggest
Allison,
piece,
it's
is
obvious you
invest in
have a
people.
fountain of knowledge, and unfortunately, we can't get to all of it today. So, how would you like people to contact you when they want to know more?
I would love to continue the discussion. And so please email me at drallisonjane@gmail. You can also check me out and connect with me on LinkedIn. So I would love to continue the conversation. I do have a consulting firm, See Jane Thrive. And so I'm ready to discuss solutions that surround your goals as an organization or your goals as an educator. So please reach out. I'd love to connect.
Well, thank you for being our guest tonight. And I
Thank you
look
for
forward
having
to,
me.
oh, it's my pleasure. And we have more we could discuss. So we'll be talking again.
Absolutely.
And I'm David Johnson from Transform Ed Consulting. And I must give a shout out to my dear colleague, Cassandra Williams, who is the brains behind Educational Innovation 360 Degrees. And we would not be on the air without her brains. So thank you, Cassandra. And thank you all for being with us this evening. And I look forward to seeing you again in the next 2 weeks. Good night.
Good night.